The Snowbound Secret, a Christmas bedtime story of peaceful whispers. Tonight's bedtime story, this sleep story, this relaxing story, this guided sleep meditation will lead you into one of the coziest, most peace and most magical Christmas nights ever, whispered through the frozen valleys of America. In the quiet folds of winter, secrets rest beneath the snow, waiting for the right listener, waiting for the world to fall asleep. Welcome, dear soul, to Midnight Murmurs Radio. I'm Evelyn Blackwood, and tonight I will guide you gently into a world of winter shadows, forgotten memories, and the soft glow of Christmas lights trembling in the wind. Before we begin, settle your body into whatever space is holding you. Take a slow breath in and release it gently. Feel your chest soften, your shoulders loosen, and the tension in your belly ease like melting frost. Let your breath fall into a calm rhythm, as if you're breathing in the distant glow of holiday candles. Let the world outside fade, becoming nothing more than a faint echo. Tonight, you are safe. Tonight, you are held by stillness. Tonight, the story will carry you. In the northern stretch of Northwood Valley, snow fell in thick, heavy sheets that Christmas Eve, covering the world in a delicate hush. Trees bowed under the weight of winter. Fences vanished beneath drifts, and rooftops gleamed with the faint shimmer of moonlight filtering through the storm. The town looked suspended between breaths, as if time itself had paused to admire the beauty of the night. But beyond the warm homes and glowing windows stood an old structure few dared to approach, the Motto House. It leaned slightly to the left, as though exhausted by years of storms and silence. Some said it had been built by fur traders long before the valley had roads. Others claimed it once belonged to a family who mysteriously vanished during an early Christmas blizzard. Children repeated the stories with trembling excitement, but adults rarely spoke of it at all. It was simply a place the town had agreed to forget. That night, Clara Benning found herself walking toward it. She had returned home after years away, hoping Northwood Valley might offer the peace she had been searching for since losing someone she loved. Deeply a loss that still ached like a bruise beneath her ribs. Her family welcomed her home for Christmas, but the warmth of the season could not quiet the heaviness inside her mind. So she stepped outside, lantern in hand, letting the snow guide her feet. The deeper she walked, the quieter her thoughts became. Snowflakes caught on her lashes, her breath curled in soft, white clouds. The familiar sounds of town laughter, music, clinking mugs, grew distant, replaced by the soft crackling of frost settling onto branches. But beneath that gentle winter soundtrack, Clara sensed something else. A faint, rhythmic murmur, almost too soft to notice. A sound that felt like a memory brushing against the edges of her consciousness. She paused, turning her head. The whisper drifted again, light, hollow, wavering. It did not belong to the wind. Clara followed the sound until the outline of the Motto House emerged through the curtain of snow, its dark frame glowing faintly with moonlit frost. Her lantern flickered, shrinking as though the flame itself was shivering. Something about the house felt different from her childhood, memories not threatening, just aware, watching, listening. The whisper came again, more distinct this time, curling around her name as though spoken by a voice buried beneath decades of snowfall. Clara stepped onto the porch, her boots sinking into old, rotting wood hidden beneath the snow. Her lantern dimmed to a thin ember. The faint light inside the cabin pulsed soft, cold, almost like a heartbeat. She reached out, hesitant, brushing her fingers against the doorframe. A wave of icy air swept past her, carrying with it the scent of old pine, candle wax, and something else. Something she could not name but felt she had known long ago. The whisper rose one more time, delicate as a trembling ribbon. Clara, her breath caught. The door creaked open, not fully, just enough to reveal a sliver of darkness, and within that darkness, a pale shimmer, like starlight trapped beneath the floorboards. Clara stepped forward, heart thudding softly, drawn by something deeper than curiosity, something that felt like fate pulling on a long-forgotten thread. As the story fades, allow yourself to drift into a peaceful sleep. Clara hesitated at the threshold, her lantern trembling in her hand like a fragile heartbeat. The thin sliver of darkness inside the Merrow house seemed alive in a quiet, unsettling way. Not dangerous, not violent, just aware, like a winter forest, listening for the slightest sound. Snow drifted behind her in slow spirals, closing the world off until all that remained was the porch, the door, and the faint whisper that had breathed her name. When Clara stepped inside, the air changed instantly. The cold outdoors had been sharp and clean, but the cold inside was different, older, layered with years of stillness, holding the scent of wood, long forgotten by warmth. Her lantern cast a soft circle of gold along the floorboards, revealing dust that shimmered like powdered frost. She noticed immediately that the faint light she had seen from outside did not come from any lamp or fire. Instead, it pulsed from beneath one of the floorboards near the center of the room, rising through the narrow cracks as if the cabin itself was exhaling pale moonlight. Clara knelt, brushing aside a thin coat of snow that clung to her boots. The wood beneath her hand felt colder than ice, but it did not repel her. Instead, it felt familiar, like touching the surface of a forgotten memory. The whisper returned soft, wavering, as though traveling from a faraway place. It drifted upward from the glowing board. A breath, a syllable, a fragment of longing. Clara leaned closer. "Hello," she whispered gently, unsure why she expected an answer. But something within the floor responded, not in words, but in feeling. A pool, a choir, a sense of urgency wrapped in sorrow. As she listened, Clara felt a slow warmth gather behind her, a soft glow reflecting faintly against the wall. Se tourne. At the far corner of the room stood an old photograph frame, its glass fogged with age. She lifted her lantern, and the dim flame revealed a black and white image inside. A family of 3 standing before the Merrow house on a winter morning long ago. A man, a woman, and a young boy with a wool coat and wide, hopeful eyes. But the strange thing, a detail that tightened Clara's breath, was that the cabin behind them looked full of life in the picture. Curtains on the windows, a wreath on the door, smoke rising from the chimney. The cabin she stood in now felt nothing like that. The photograph radiated warmth. The rear cabin felt like a tomb echoing with cold memories. As Clara studied the faces, another glow brightened at her feet. She stepped back quickly, expecting flame, but instead found a soft, ribbon-thin trail of light weaving across the floor, leading from the glowing board toward the staircase, descending into the cellar. She had no memory of a cellar being there when she was a child, but then again, she'd never stepped foot inside. The whisper drifted again, closer, brushing her ear like a fragile fingertip. And this time it formed a single word barely audible, yet impossible to deny. "Help!" Clara froze. The light pulsed gently, guiding her toward the cellar door. Her heart beat with soft, steady thumps, not out of fear, but out of a strange, quiet empathy. Whoever or whatever was calling did not feel threatening. It felt red cold, lost. She lifted her lantern and approached the cellar door. The rusty hinges groaned softly as she pulled it open, releasing a draft of air so cold it felt like stepping into the breath of winter itself. A staircase curved downward into darkness, but the thin trail of light wound along the steps like a guiding thread. Clara's boots creaked as she descended slowly, lantern raised, breath tight in her chest. Each step brought her deeper into the quiet, deeper into the icy stillness, deeper into the heart of whatever secret had been frozen beneath the cabin for decades. When she reached the bottom, her lantern revealed a narrow room lined with shelves of old crates, rusted tools, and jars of things long discolored by time. But at the center of the cellar sat something unexpected. A small wooden chest, no larger than a child's toy box, coated in layers of frost. The glowing thread of light ended at its base, pulsing softly like a heartbeat waiting to be heard. Clara knelt before it. The air vibrated faintly around her, as if holding its breath. The whisper rose again, fractured and trembling. "Please." Her hand hovered above the lid. She didn't know what she would find inside. She only knew the cabin had been waiting for someone to listen, and the night, it had chosen her. As the story fades, allow yourself to drift into a peaceful sleep, continuing from the quiet unease, settling over the cabin. Evelyn's voice drifts like a slow current guiding the listener, deeper into the unfolding mystery as the snowstorm thickens around the old cottage. In that vast white silence, Clara felt the world narrowing into a cocoon of flakes and memory, a place where time seemed to loosen its grip and breathe softly against her ear. She wandered from window to window, following the strange pattern of frost that resembled tangled handwriting, as if someone long ago had tried to press a message into the ice itself. The lantern on the table flickered with a tremor too deliberate to be the wind alone, and Clara paused, sensing a faint hum in the air, low, mournful, almost like an echo from beneath the floorboards. She knelt and placed her hand against the wooden planks, feeling a subtle vibration rise into her fingertips, steady and rhythmic, the way a heartbeat might linger inside an old house, unwilling to sleep. The storm outside deepened, wrapping the cottage in a muffled stillness, and in that velvety silence she heard it again, a faint knock, not from the door, but from somewhere beneath her feet. Slow and patient, and impossibly calm, she whispered into the dim glow, asking if anyone was there, though she knew no living soul could have answered from beneath the frozen ground. Yet the knocking paused, then tapped once more, like a reply shaped from memory rather than flesh. Clara stood, her breath trembling in the lantern light, and moved toward the old cupboard in the corner, the one she had noticed earlier but felt reluctant to open. Its worn handles were cold as river stones, and as she pulled the doors apart, a sharp breath of chilled air brushed her face. Inside she found a single wooden box, its surface etched with delicate carvings of pine branches and tiny snowflakes arranged in swirling patterns reminiscent of the frost on the windows. The box rattled faintly when she lifted it, as though something inside shifted with a soft metallic sigh. She placed it on the table and hesitated before opening it, letting her breath slow the way Evelyn had guided, allowing the tension to melt into the quiet, lapping rhythm of the storm. When she finally lifted the lid, the air seemed to thicken around her. Inside lay an old brass key, tarnished and strangely warm to the touch, along with a folded slip of parchment marked by age. Clara unfolded it, revealing a single line of handwriting inked in a graceful, looping script. "Do not forget the promise beneath the snow." The words sent a ripple down her spine, not of fear, but of recognition she couldn't place. As she traced the letters, the lantern flame bent sharply to one side, as though disturbed by a passing figure, and the frost on the nearest window began to shift, spiraling into a new pattern forming right before her eyes, not random this time, but deliberate, almost like a map. A narrow trail of frost branched from the sill to the lower edge of the window, then curved downward, pointing unmistakably toward the floorboards near the center of the room. The knocking resumed, gentle, patient, rhythmic, inviting, rather than frightening, as though urging her to remember something she had never consciously known. Clara approached the spot, pressed her palm to the wood again, and felt the soft pulse of cold air rising from a nearly invisible seam between the boards. She slid the brass key from her pocket and, without fully understanding why, pressed it against the seam, which shifted beneath her hand with a muted click as a narrow panel loosened and lifted slightly on its own. Beneath it lay a small hollow chamber lined with cedar shavings, and resting within the hollow was a delicate silver pendant shaped like a snowflake, its center carved with the same swirling motif that appeared on the wooden box. As she reached for it, the pendant shimmered with an inner glow, faint and pale like moonlight caught in crystal. Whisper soft, almost spoken through Fabry, floated through the cottage, brushing against her ears with the gentleness of snowfall. The sound felt ancient, sorrowful, longing, as if someone trapped in time had waited for her touch to be remembered. Clara lifted the pendant, feeling warmth bloom across her palms. And in that moment a memory not her own surged through her mind. A woman standing at the edge of a frozen lake under the dim glow of lanterns, snow swirling around her while she whispered a promise to return for someone she loved but could not save. The vision faded as quickly as it arrived, leaving Clara breathless, yet strangely calmed, as if she had stepped into a story she was meant to continue. And as the storm outside softened into gentle flakes, drifting lazily through the night, Evelyn's voice lowered like a lullaby, guiding the listener deeper into rest. As the story fades, allow yourself to drift into a peaceful sleep. Clara stood in the hush of the snowbound cabin, the pendant warm against her palm, as though alive with a heartbeat older than the land itself. And Evelyn's voice flowed gently through the dark, like a soft current pulling the listener deeper into the unfolding quiet. The storm outside had softened into a slow sweep of flakes, swirling past the frosted window. Yet inside everything felt suspended time, breath, even the lantern flame, which burned steady and upright, as if holding itself still for what came next. Clara traced the carved center of the pendant again, feeling the faint pulse of its glow, a rhythm that seemed to align with the knocking she had heard earlier beneath the floorboards. She approached the hidden compartment once more, letting her fingertips glide over the cedar-lined hollow, searching for more clues. But the space held nothing except the lingering warmth of something that had long been waiting. She whispered into the dim air, asking who had left the pendant and why she had been the one to find it. Though she did not expect an answer, yet something did respond on in words, but in a soft shift in the air, like a delicate breath exhaled behind her. She turned slowly, her gaze settling on the frost-patterned window where the swirling lines began to rearrange themselves again, the icy script moving with silent intention. This time, the frost formed a shape knot, a map, not a message, but the silhouette of a woman wrapped in a winter shawl, her head bowed and her hands cradling something small and luminous. Clara stepped closer, the image sharpening as though the frost were a veil pulled aside to reveal a memory carved into the glass. The woman lifted her head, and though her features were blurred by the shifting ice, Clara felt a piercing familiarity, warmth blooming in her chest that made her breath hitch. The silhouette raised her hands and released the object she was holding, letting it fall into the snow at her feet. The moment it disappeared from the woman's palms, the frost on the window fractured into scattered shards of patterns, swirling back into chaos. Clara pressed her hand to the cold glass, pulse fluttering with the memory that had surged through her earlier, the woman at the frozen lake, whispering a promise she had not kept. She felt as though someone was entangled with her fate, tugging gently at her bones, urging her to remember a story buried beneath layers of winter and silence. Behind her, the lantern flickered once, twice, and then its glow stretched along the far wall, illuminating a narrow crack she had never noticed before. The seam ran vertically along the wooden paneling, subtle but purposeful, as if marking an entryway not meant for casual eyes. Clara approached cautiously, her breaths slow and steady, mirroring the guided rhythm Evelyn's voice whispered for the listeners. As the night deepened, she pressed the pendant to the crack, and the wood trembled faintly beneath her touch. The panel loosened with a soft groan, shifting open just enough for her to pull it aside. A narrow staircase descended into darkness, the air drifting up cold and ancient, carrying a faint scent of pine needles and old memories trapped beneath the cabin for decades. She hesitated only a moment before she stepped down, the stairs creaking softly under her weight. The deeper she descended, the quieter the world above became, until even the storm's whisper faded into nothing but the slow cadence of her own breath. At the bottom of the stairs, Clara found a small underground room lit by the pale glow of bioluminescent lichen clinging to the stone walls, casting everything in soft, ghostly hues. In the center stood an old wooden chest bound with iron bands, each etched with symbols of snowflakes, lanterns, and winding branches motifs that echoed the pendant's design. She approached the chest, kneeling beside it as though drawn by an instinct older than memory. When she touched the iron latch, the room shifted slightly, settling with a deep sigh through the stones. She lifted the lid, and inside she discovered a collection of objects: a child's woolen mitten, stiffened by time, a cracked porcelain snow globe depicting a frozen lake, and a folded letter sealed with wax, bearing the emblem of a lantern surrounded by swirling snow. Clara broke the seal with trembling fingers and unfolded the brittle parchment. The letter was written in the same elegant hand she had seen before. The ink faded, but still legible. When the storm returns, so too will the truth. Seek the one who waits beneath the lake, for she holds the promise we could not keep. A shiver rippled through her, not of fear, but of recognition, as though the words awakened something dormant within her soul. She closed the letter gently, aware now that she was walking through a story that had been waiting decades for someone to complete it. As she stood in the stillness of the underground chamber, the pendant glowed again, lighting the room with a soft halo of pale blue light that shimmered over the walls like moonlight on fresh snow. And as the glow settled into a steady pulse, Evelyn's low, calming whisper guided listeners toward rest once more. As the story fades, allow yourself to drift into a peaceful sleep. Clara held the glowing pendant as the faint blue radiance pulsed gently against her fingers, casting shifting waves of light over the stone walls of the hidden chamber, and Evelyn's calming whisper wrapped around the unfolding moment like a soft winter wind, guiding listeners deeper into the night. The ancient stillness of the underground room pressed close, yet nothing felt threatening. Instead, there was a sense of patient anticipation, as though the cabin itself had been waiting for Clara to step into this forgotten space. She lifted the cracked snow globe from the chest, turning it slowly in her hands. Inside, tiny white flecks drifted lazily around the miniature frozen lake, moving of their own accord. Even though she had not shaken it, the snow within the globe swirled faster, forming a spiral that mirrored the frost patterns from the cabin window. Within the spiraling storm, a faint shape appeared, a woman standing at the lake center, her outline blurred by swirling ice, her gaze fixed outward as if searching through time. Clara brought the globe closer, breath fogging the glass, and somewhere deep within the swirling white, she heard a whisper, almost mournful a sound, like a memory trying to free itself from winter's grip. She set the snow globe down carefully, steadying her breath. The letter's words echoed through her mind. Seek the one who waits beneath the lake. As the thought formed, the pendant warmed suddenly, its pulse quickening in time with her heartbeat. A faint tremor moved through the chamber floor, subtle but deliberate, as though something deep beneath the earth recognized the pendant's awakening. Clara knelt again by the chest, brushing her fingers over the woolen mitten. It was tiny, clearly, a child's hand. When she lifted it, a cold breeze brushed across her hand, despite the still air around her. For a moment she wasn't in the chamber at all. She was standing on the edge of a frozen lake at night, the wind cutting across her cheeks, lanterns glowing faintly along the shoreline. She felt the presence of someone small holding her hand, tugging gently, their voice whispering something she could not yet understand. The vision faded as quickly as it had come, leaving Clara in the soft blue glow, her pulse trembling with wonder rather than fear. She rose to her feet, the pendant swinging gently from her hand and casting soft light across a series of carvings on the far wall. She approached them slowly. The carvings formed a timeline of sorts, moments, etched into the stone-like fragments of a life lived long ago. The first carving showed the same woman she had seen in the frost, holding a lantern and a child's mitten. Another showed the frozen lake, with a shadowy shape beneath the ice. The final carving depicted the lantern symbol encircled by swirling snowtha, same emblem from the letter's wax seal. She reached out and traced the final symbol, and as Her finger touched the etched lines. The stone shimmered faintly before responding with a deep, low resonance, almost like a hum. The pendant brightened in reply, the chamber filling with a soft chorus of echoing vibration. Evan's voice guided listeners to breathe slowly, to feel their bodies sinking deeper into calm, even as the story gently brushed the edges of the supernatural. Clara stepped back as the humming grew louder, though still soothing, its vibration running through the floor like a distant heartbeat rising from the earth. Then, like a sigh, the humming stopped. The pendant dimmed to a soft glow once more. The quiet that followed felt even deeper than before, a quiet that invited truth to rise gently to the surface. Clara felt drawn back toward the stairs, as though the room had given her all it could for now. She climbed slowly, lantern in hand, each step creaking softly beneath her. When she emerged into the cabin, the air was different, lighter, clear as though something heavy had lifted from the walls around her. The wind outside had calmed into a soft whisper, snow drifting in slow, peaceful waves past the windows. She crossed the room, pausing at the frost-swept glass. New patterns had formed while she was below, but these were not warnings or memories. They were guiding lines, pointing outward toward the lake she had glimpsed in her vision. The pendant glowed once, faint but warm, confirming what she already felt in her bones. The truth was waiting for her out there, beneath layers of ice and time. Clara wrapped herself in her thick winter coat, pulled on her boots, and stepped toward the door. As she opened it, a gentle gust of snow-laced air swept into the cabin, brushing past her like a familiar hand urging her forward. She took one last look at the lantern's steady flame before stepping out into the snowbound night. Evelyn's soft voice accompanied the moment, letting listeners sink further into tranquility even as the mystery deepened. As the story fades, allow yourself to drift into a peaceful sleep. Clara stepped into the snow-laden night, the cold air wrapping around her like a long-forgotten memory returning to claim its place, and Evelyn's gentle, low whisper guided the listeners deeper into this soft, calming darkness. The snow stretched across the clearing in smooth, unbroken drifts, glowing faintly beneath the early winter moon. Edge of Clara's footsteps pressed silently into the untouched white, and the pendant at her chest pulsed with steady warmth, illuminating a faint blue halo that blended with the moonlit air. The wind carried only a distant hum, a subtle vibration that tugged at her thoughts, like a quiet summons rising from beneath the ground. She followed the frost-etched patterns she had seen on the cabin window, lines pointing toward the lake, hidden within the forest's embrace. Branches bowed low under the weight of fresh snow, forming archways that guided her path as though the woods themselves remembered her presence from another time. With every step, she felt the strange familiarity deepen, the slight tilt of the trees, the curve of the narrow trail, the way the air thickened with silence just before the lake came into view. When she reached its edge, the sight stole her breath. The lake was frozen in a perfect sheet of pale silver, the moon's reflection shimmering across its surface like a veil of quiet magic. Lantern posts lined the perimeter, old, untouched by time, their metal frames dusted by snow. But beneath the frost, Clara could swear she saw faint traces of soot inside each glass case, as if they had once burned with steady flames during a night that had carved its story into the land. She stepped closer to the ice, feeling the pull from beneath her budza subtle, rhythmic pulse, echoing the pendant's glow. Evelyn's voice drifted softly, urging the listeners to breathe deeply and sink into the peaceful cadence of the snowy scene. Clara's reflection shimmered on the ice for a moment, before another figure appeared behind it, a blurred silhouette of the woman she had seen in the frost. Shawl drawn close, her presence gentle yet weighted with sorrow. Clara knelt, placing her palm against the surface. The ice was cold, but not harsh. It felt alive, humming softly beneath her touch. Memories not her own flickered at the edge of her consciousness. The lanterns glowing along the lake, the sound of a child's laughter echoing across the frozen surface, a sudden crack far beneath the winter hush. The humming grew slightly stronger, and the pendant brightened, sending a soft beam of blue light wandering across the lake's surface until it settled on a point near the center, where the ice darkened into a shadowed circle. Clara rose to her feet, heartbeat steady despite the cold. The shadowed patch called to her, gently, insistent, patient. She walked carefully onto the ice, feeling the smooth surface shift subtly under her weight, though not in danger, more like the lake exhaled slowly with every step she took. Snowflakes drifted down in slow, deliberate spirals, as though drawn to her path. When she reached the dark patch, she knelt again and pressed a pendant directly to the ice. The glow seeped downward, illuminating faint shapes beneath the surface and outline of the woman's shawl, the glimmer of a lantern, and beside them something small wrapped in wool, its bright color muted by decades of winter. Clara inhaled sharply. Te. Te metan, the one from the chest. The same tiny shape she had felt in the fleeting vision of standing with a child at the lake's edge. A warmth radiated from the pendant, spreading across the ice like a gentle wave, softening the frost beneath her hand. A whisper drifted upward, not a frightening sound, but the quiet tone of someone relieved to finally be heard. The ice beneath her grew clearer, revealing the woman's face for the first time, kind, marked by sorrow but not malice. Her eyes lifted toward Clara, not pleading but guiding. Clara understood then that she wasn't here to uncover danger. She was here to finish a promise left undone, a story frozen before its ending could be written. The woman's image dissolved back into swirling light before the pendant dimmed once more, returning the lake to its serene stillness. Clara rose slowly, her breath forming soft clouds that drifted upward toward the moon. She knew she had to return to the cabin, to piece together what she had seen and prepare for whatever truth awaited her in the next chapter of this winter-bound mystery. As she walked back through the silent forest, the lanterns along the shore flickered faintly, gustas, once as though bidding her goodbye for now. The snow whispered beneath her boots, guiding her safely toward the warm glow of the cabin waiting up the hill. And as the light came into view, Evelyn's calm, soothing voice settled over the listeners like a blanket of soft falling snow. As the story fades, allow yourself to drift into a peaceful sleep. When Clara stepped back into the cabin, shaking the snow from her coat, the air felt warmer than before, as though the house itself had awakened and was quietly drawing breath again. and Evelyn's soft midnight whisper wrapped around the moment with a calming, slow cadence that invited listeners back into the deep winter hush. The lantern flame glowed with steady warmth, no longer flickering with uncertainty, but burning as though it recognized she had taken the first step toward the truth buried beneath the frozen lake. Clara closed the door behind her, letting the silence settle gently around her shoulders. She hung her coat by the hearth and approached the table where she had set the letter, the snow globe, and the small mitten. Each object felt heavier now, weighted by the memory of the woman beneath the ice and the faint whisper she had heard rising through the frozen surface. Clara traced the mitten carefully, her fingers brushing the stiff wool. A sudden warmth spread through her chest, a familiarity she could not explain, like the memory of holding a tiny hand in her own. The pendant responded instantly, pulsing with a slow, deliberate rhythm, its glow casting soft shadows across the wooden walls. She lifted the snow globe next, watching the flakes drift inside with a life of their own. They no longer spun chaotically. Instead, they floated in slow spirals, forming gentle patterns like lullabies woven from frost. As she watched, the miniature lake at the globe's center shimmered, and a faint ring of light appeared along its edge. The same ring of lantern posts that circled the real lake outside. A soft sigh drifted through the room, not quite wind, not quite breath. Clara turned her head slowly toward the frost-lined window. The frost had reformed overnight, but this time it no longer carved frantic symbols or fading silhouettes. Instead, it shaped itself into a single, delicate scene. A cabin much like this one, lanterns burning bright in the snow, and two figures standing side by side, a woman and a young boy, their hands intertwined. Clara stared, her pulse quickening. She reached toward the image, and as her fingertips touched the glass, a memory she had never lived surged through her like a wave of winter light. She stood not in the cabin, but outdoors on a quiet December night, lanterns glowing along the snowy path. The boy tugged at her hand, laughing, his boots leaving tiny prints behind him. She felt the cold on her cheeks, the weight of the lantern in her free hand, and the sense of peace that wrapped around them like a soft woolen blanket. Then, without warning, the scene shifted. A deep crack echoed through the vision, splitting the laughter in half. She felt the boy's hand slip from hers. She saw him fall. The ice broke open beneath the lantern light, and everything was swallowed in white. Clara gasped and pulled her hand away, stumbling back as the frost image dissolved instantly into a scatter of swirling particles. Her breath trembled, her heart thudding in a slow, atching rhythm. She pressed a hand to her chest, grounding herself in the warm glow of the pendant. It anchored her, reminding her gently that she was not reliving the past, only witnessing its shadow. Evelyn's whisper eased softly through the quiet, reminding listeners to breathe deeply, to let their bodies relax as the winter truth slowly unfolded. Clara moved toward the hearth, kneeling beside the embers. She placed the pendant on the floor, letting its glow spill across the objects. Something about the warmth seemed to awaken the cabin's old wood. A deep groan stirred from within the walls, a slow, resonant sound like the cabin was clearing its throat after decades of silence. Then, from somewhere above, a soft knock echoed. 1, 2, 3, steady, gentle, unmistakably deliberate. Clara lifted her gaze toward the loft. She had not ventured up there since arriving. The stairs were steep, and the air above had always felt dense, cold, as though holding its own pocket of winter. But now the knock came again quiet, inviting, not threatening, the kind of knock a child might make when afraid but hopeful someone would answer. Clara rose slowly to her feet, her breath forming soft ghosts in the warm air. She picked up the lantern, letting its gentle flame guide her toward the staircase. The wood creaked beneath her steps, each sound soft by the thick hush of snow outside. When she reached the loft door, she paused, her hand hovering above the old brass handle. The knocking had stopped, replaced by a hush so complete it felt like the whole cabin was holding its breath. Clara exhaled slowly, wrapped her fingers around the handle, and pushed the door open. Evelyn's voice lowered into a soft, soothing murmur, inviting listeners to drift deeper into the calm as the winter mystery deepened with quiet purpose. The loft was dark at first. Shadows curled into corners like forgotten memories, but as Clara stepped inside, the pendant glowed faintly, casting soft ripples of blue light along the wooden beams. And there, in the far corner, she saw an old trunk, its lid slightly ajar, snow-dusted footprints leading directly to it. Tiny footprints. A child's. As the lantern flame swayed gently, Clara took a deep breath and stepped forward. As the story fades, allow yourself to drift into a peaceful sleep. In the dim, fading light of the late afternoon, Evelyn stood silently in the old attic room of Willamere House, where the walls seemed to still hold the breath of memory. When she reached out and touched the rotting wooden frame of the small window, a cold draft slipped through the narrow gap, carrying with it the damp scent of time and that forgotten fragrance of old wood. The sensation made her shiver, yet it also quickened her heartbeat, as if something long hidden was preparing to reveal itself. Beneath the thick layers of dust and the webs draped over every object lay a story she knew had never been fully told. The soft patter of rain on the roof blended with the steady breath of the attic, making the entire space feel as though it were whispering a somber lullaby. Evelyn opened the small drawer of the antique wooden desk, and inside were sheets of yellowed paper, their edges curled as if they had once absorbed water and dried again over the passing years. She picked up the first page, her eyes gliding over the delicate, emotional handwriting. It appeared to be the diary of Eleanor, the woman who had once lived here, the same name that had echoed like a lingering voice in the previous part. Waiting to be answered. But what made Evelyn freeze was the very first line, written in a rushed, trembling hand. If someone finds this, it means the secret I kept cannot stay buried forever. A chill ran down her spine. Not because of the old house, but because of the tone. This wasn't fear, it was a warning. Evelyn read faster, and bit by bit, Eleanor's memories unfolded like fragments of a painting that had been violently torn apart. Eleanor wrote that the house had once been a refuge for wandering soulspeople who came seeking something higher, deeper, and at times far more dangerous. They believed that beneath the house, in the sealed-off basement, there existed something they called the echoing vein, a strange current of energy, capable of absorbing human emotion and reflecting it back to anyone sensitive enough to feel it. Her handwriting grew shaky toward the end, as though Eleanor herself was afraid to write down what she knew. What was unsettling was how perfectly her descriptions matched what Evelyn had felt since stepping into Willowmere House. The invisible weight, the subtle vibrations in the air. And what happened that morning when she heard a whisper behind her despite being alone in the room. When she reached the final page, Evelyn found a symbol drawn in black ink, a circle enclosing two intersecting lines, an emblem resembling a doorway into something deeper, and beneath it a short sentence that made her breath catch. If the listener has come this far, be careful of what you dream. At that moment, the entire attic seemed to fall into a silence so deep she could hear her own heartbeat echoing inside the stillness. She closed the diary, trying to steady her breath, but the sensation that someone was standing right behind her still clung to the air. No footsteps. No shadow. Yet the atmosphere shifted as if an old spirit was watching her every move, waiting to see whether she would dare to continue. Evelyn closed her eyes for a moment and then opened them with renewed resolve. She had come here seeking answers, and what Eleanor left behind made it clear that everything was only just beginning, even knowing that the truth ahead might be something others would run from. She steadied her breathing and walked slowly down the stairs, the diary of secrets held tightly in her hand because she understood that Eleanor's story was not just the past. It was waking up again. Clara stepped out of the basement carrying a fragile mix of anticipation and tenderness. The light from the oil lantern dancing across the old wooden walls as Evelyn Blackwood whispered into the listener's ear like a gentle winter current, guiding them to relax their body, breathe slowly, close their eyes, and drift into a safe, imagined space. Snow fell beyond the window in a soft white curtain, and every step Clara took on the wooden floor creaked lightly, the rhythm of the house syncing with her heartbeat, each pulse gentle yet somber, reminding her that the story was still awakening. She walked toward the table where the objects from the basement chest had been arranged and lifted the old letter, the pendant's glow spreading across the thin paper, revealing faded characters and delicate curves of handwriting, as though Eleanor herself were sending a message across time and distance. Clara read line by line, feeling the loneliness, the fear, and the quiet hope woven into each sentence. And when her eyes stopped at the final words, "Find me by the lake when the snow stops falling," a soft chill traveled up her spine, haunting yet soothing, pulling her into a dreamlike space where reality and the past intertwined. She set the pendant on the table, sat on the old wooden chair, closed her eyes, and took a deep breath, her entire body loosening as her mind drifted along Evelyn's slow narration, layers of scenery unfolding before her. A shimmering frozen lake, a snow-covered railing, the silhouettes of a woman and a child standing beneath the dim glow of a lantern, every small detail of falling snowflakes, the whisper of wind through the trees becoming vividly alive in Clara esa imagination. When she opened her eyes, she looked toward the window where the snowy veil still fell, and realized that the path to the lake now appeared in her memory like a trail Eleanor had carved long ago. Every sign, every object, every symbol etched into the basement wall connected into a mental map guiding her forward. Clara put on her warm coat, pulled on her wool hat, held the pendant and the letter, and stepped outside, feeling the cold slip through the layers of fabric, but her heart warmed by the knowledge that she was walking the path of an unresolved secret, where the past The present and the supernatural blended into one. Snow thickened as she walked the narrow trail, each flake fading into the dim light behind her. But the pendant continued to glow, guiding her like a small star in the silent winter night. Clara moved toward the lake, enveloped by a deep stillness, hearing only the crunch of her steps on the snow and the soft wind gliding through the trees, while Evelyn's slow, calm narration seemed to merge with the hush of the world, making every detail vivid. The sheet of ice across the lake, the reflected silhouettes of the trees, the glittering night sky shimmering on the white snow. When Clara reached the lakeside, the frozen surface glowed under the moonlight, reflecting the pendant's faint blue light, and she noticed faint marks on the small footprints, almost childlike, leading toward the lake center, where the pendant's light flickered as if signaling something about to reveal itself. She followed the footprints, each step slow, each breath blending with the cold night air. And when she reached the center of the lake, she knelt down and placed the pendant on the ice. Its light spread outward, illuminating a small object beneath the thin frozen layer, a child's woolen scarf, the same as the one in the chest and in the memories the letter described. Clara lifted the scarf, and a wave of emotion washed over her. Sorrow, hope, and a forgotten promise. The lake glowed eerily, the pendant's reflection shimmering through the fragile ice, like a reminder that the final secret was about to surface. Evelyn whispered into the listener's ear, her voice low, warm, and flowing like slow water over the frozen lake. As the story fades, allow yourself to drift into a peaceful sleep. Clara knelt beside the lake, placing the small wool scarf on the thin layer of ice. The light from the pendant spread across the frozen surface, reflecting against the white streaks of snow like whispered fragments of the past, while Evelyn Blackwood's gentle voice murmured softly in the listener's ear, guiding them into a space both mysterious and serene, where winter's drama intertwined with quiet wonder. The wind drifted by soft, but enough to make tiny snowflakes dance around her, forming shimmering trails beneath the moonlight. Clara felt a presence nearby, not clear, yet incredibly tender, as though the very spirits Eleanor had spoken of were watching her every movement. She breathed deeply, steadying her rhythm, letting her body dissolve into the scene, and when she placed the pendant onto the ice, its glow synced with her breath, with a distant crackling sound of rain shattering on the frozen lake, forming a gentle rhythm, soothing yet stirring curiosity. Beneath the ice, the faint silhouettes of a woman and a child appeared, just like the memory she had glimpsed through the snow globe and the letter. Clara recognized every detail: the scarf, the knitted hat, the tiny footsteps on the ice. Everything aligned perfectly, like an emotional map guiding her toward an unfinished story. She leaned forward, touching the ice. The cold spread through her skin, yet brought no shiver. Instead, it filled her with a strange connection to what had happened years before. Evelyn guided the listeners to breathe deeper, close their eyes, and feel the world around them just as Clara was feeling it. Every detail, every sound, every subtle tremble of ice and snow becoming vivid in the imagination. Clara stood and looked around the lake, noticing the old lampposts still standing in silence, their soft golden glow reflected across the ice, forming a mystical circle, as if each light held a tale, an untold memory. She stepped slowly toward the circle, the pendant glowing brighter as she neared the center where a delicate ring of light formed on the surface. From that ring came a faint whisper, not the wind, not the snow, but the voice of memories long frozen, reminding her of the responsibility she now carried. Clara knelt again, eyes following the pendant's trembling glow. When her hand touched the ice once more, the vision sharpened. The woman and child moved toward her, their steps gentle, not touching the surface as though they existed between two worlds, between memory and reality. A soft warmth spread through Clara, her heart beating slowly, yet without fear. Evelyn whispered, her voice low and soothing, guiding listeners to relax, letting their bodies harmonize with the scene, the cold air of the lake, but the inner world growing warm, peaceful, both suspenseful and tender, creating the coziest, most peaceful feeling. Clara inhaled deeply, sensing every detail, the sound of ice shifting, the pendant's glow, the soft fall of snow, the smiling silhouettes of the woman and child. Everything reminded her that the final secret was not fear, but connection, understanding, and a promise waiting to be fulfilled. She rose, stepped back from the lake's center, observing the ring of light, knowing she had completed the first part of her journey, opening the door to the discoveries that awaited in this mysterious winter night. A gentle breeze passed, clearing away tension, while the pendant rested softly in her hand, glowing faintly as if to remind her that the story would continue, though for now the night was calm enough to listen, to rest, to sink into the quiet wonder of winter. As Clara walked back to the shore, snow drifted around her, each step gliding lightly on the thin ice, creating a soft rhythm that blended with Evelyn's calming voice as she guided listeners to breathe slowly, relax their bodies, close their eyes, and drift into deep sleep. With the pendant's gentle flicker illuminating the winter night, the atmosphere became magical and calming. As the story fades, allow yourself to drift into a peaceful sleep. Clara pulled her warm coat tighter around her, the pendant hanging at her chest like a small guiding star amid the thick curtain of falling snow. And Evelyn Blackwood whispered into the listener's ear with her low, unhurried voice, guiding them to relax their body, breathe slowly, close their eyes, and let their imagination drift along the gentle, mysterious flow of the story, where every detail around the lake unfolded vividly in their mind. She walked along the lake shore where the thin ice curled around frozen branches, each step leaving faint imprints on the soft, white snow. And from afar the silhouettes of trees shimmered faintly on the ice, flickering in the pendant's pale glow. The wind rustled through the branches, blending with the soft patter of falling snow, forming a soothing rhythm just enough to ease the listener deeper into calm. Clara approached a small wooden bridge, blanketed in snow, where the ice beneath her feet glowed faintly under the pendant's light, reflecting the silhouettes of the woman and child she had seen in the memories and the old letter, reminding her that every secret was bound across time and space. As she stepped onto the bridge, the wood creaked softly, harmonizing with Evelyn esse hintle cadence, and Clara felt a strange pulse beneath the ice jet. Rhythmicas? Though the lake was more than a physical place, holding within it the emotions and lingering memories of wandering spirits. She paused at the center of the bridge and looked down through the clear ice, where the image of the wool scarf, the pendant, and the tiny footprints appeared unmistakably. and the sense of quiet wonder spread through her heart. Like the entire lake was reminding her that her task was not to fear, but to connect and fulfill the promise left unfinished. She bent down, touching the ice with her fingertips, the cold seeping into her skin but tender, and her breath aligned with the soft vibrations of the pendant, forming a harmony between her body, her imagination, and the winter world around her. Evelyn continued guiding the listeners, her voice soft and whisper-like, encouraging tranquility, peace, and the gentle magic unfolding through the scene, making every detail feel magical and coziest, from the flickering glow of the pendant to the faint silhouettes of the woman and child, all blending seamlessly with the wind, the falling snow, and the moon's pale gleam. Clara rose and walked across the bridge to view the lake from the opposite side, where the old lampposts stood in silent stillness, their pale golden light reflecting on the ice, forming an enchanted circle, as though each lantern guarded a memory, a winter tale waiting to be heard. As Clara approached the lake center once more, the pendant's light blossomed softly, illuminating the ice around her, and from that glow came a wave of cold air, not frightening, but gentle, surrounding her and sharpening every detail. The scarf resting on the ice, the smiling silhouettes of the woman and child, the faint footprints leading from the shore to the center. She inhaled deeply, closed her eyes, and let herself feel the peace spreading within, blending with Evelyn's calm narration, both thrilling and tender, both mysterious and calming. Clara turned back toward the shore, the pendant's pale light reflecting over the white snow, and she realized that everything she had experienced since arriving at Willowmere House had led her to this moment, the convergence of past, present, and the spirits who waited to be heard. She breathed deeply, placed the pendant back against her chest, and stepped away from the center of the lake, each step light, letting the pendant's glow melt into the snow, spreading gently around her like a quiet reminder that, though the journey was far from over, this moment was peaceful enough to savor the magical, serene heart of winter. The wind brushed by. Clara's heart beat steady, the snow drifting softly, and the pendant's flickering glow seemed to pulse in harmony with Evelyn's storytelling, creating a space both subtly haunting and deeply peaceful. And as Clara reached the edge of the lake and looked back at the entire scene, Evelyn whispered softly, as the story fades, "Allow yourself to drift into a peaceful sleep." Clara stood quietly at the edge of the lake, the pendant hanging around her neck, casting a gentle glow across the thin layer of snow-covered ice. And Evelyn Blackwood whispered into the listener's ear with her low, unhurried voice, guiding them to relax their body, breathe deeply, close their eyes, and sink into a space that felt both wondrous and profoundly calm. The moonlight reflected over the frozen surface, forming a silver mirror where the silhouettes of the woman and the child appeared one last time, smiling softly, as if reminding Clara that every secret had been connected, every promise fulfilled. She leaned down, placing her hand on the ice, feeling the cold seep into her skin, but finding no fear in it. Instead, a gentle warmth radiated outward from the pendant, blending into the magical and coziest atmosphere surrounding her, as though the lake itself and the winter night were offering their quiet blessing for her. And for the souls who had lived within these memories for so long, Clara drew a deep breath, closed her eyes, and listened to the wind rustling through the snow-covered branches, the faint crackle of ice beneath the wooden bridge, and the soft patter of falling snow like deep, steady drumbeats leading her mind and body deeper into the story. When she opened her eyes again, she saw the pendant's light reflecting on the snow, creating shimmering trails leading away from the lake, reminding her that the journey was far from over. Yet the present moment held all the peace, magic, and connection between past and present she needed. Clara followed the glowing path, each step pressing softly into the snow, the gentle rhythm of her footsteps blending with Evelyn's soothing narration, allowing the listener to feel safe, deeply relaxed, and wrapped in a tender curiosity. She paused at the center of the wooden bridge, looking down at the lake once more. The small footprints on the ice had faded into the whiteness, yet the sense of presence lingered around her, gentle and serene. Evelyn whispered, urging the listener to breathe slowly, feel their body melt into the quiet space, and let their imagination float along the unhurried rhythm of the tale every detail, every soft vibration merging as one. Dependence glow, the thin ice, the wind and snow, the silhouettes of lost spirits, forming a state that was magical, calming, and deeply peaceful. Clara stepped back onto the lakeshore where the old lantern posts remained motionless, their pale golden light reflecting in a perfect ring across the ice, as though the entire lake and everything around it had accepted her story of secret, every sorrow, every hope now woven together. She inhaled deeply once more, closing her eyes to feel the steady rhythm of her breath, allowing peace and winter's quiet magic to spread through her body, merging with the snow-filled landscape. And in her mind, the once-forgotten spirit smiled softly, floating away with Evelyn's slow, grounding voice. As Clara stepped away from the lake, the pendant flickered gently, snow settling on her shoulders, the wind carrying a faint scent of old wood and winter air, every element tender, emotional, yet the narration reminding her and the listener that every moment deserved attention, every sensation deserved to be felt. She paused to take in the entire scene under the moonlight, the stillness embracing everything. The ice, the pendant's glow, the drifting snow, the whispering wind through bare branches, the blurred shapes of past and present intertwined. And Evelyn whispered softly into the listener's ear, as the story fades, allow yourself to drift into a peaceful sleep. Clara closed her eyes, breathing deeply, and understood that her journey through Willowmere House and the frozen lake had given her not only answers to old mysteries, but also presaged a bridge between past, present, and the quiet magic of winter. She walked slowly toward the path leading away from the lake, the pendant glowing softly against her coat, snow settling into her hair, the silence around her so complete that every sound seemed to move with her breath. Evelyn's voice lingering in the listener's mind, making the moment perfect for drifting into a deep, coziest, magical, calming, peaceful sleep. As Clara left the lakeside, she looked back one final time, seeing the pendant's light reflected faintly across the ice, fading gently into the falling snow, as if whispering that the story had closed, yet the memories, the magic, and the emotions would remain. Evelyn murmured softly, as the story fades, allow yourself to drift into a peaceful sleep.